My name is Lynda Gichanda Spencer. I'm from Rhodes University. I'm the principal investigator of urban connections in African Popular Imaginaries. I'm a fellow at STIAS, and together with me is Nedine Moonsamy from the University of Pretoria, Danai Mupotsa from Wits University, and Corinne Sandwith from the University of Pretoria, and Tina Steiner from Stellenbosch University.
In a nutshell, the Okapi project is about exploring and investigating the idea of the popular in a various range of disciplines that include the social sciences, urban studies, and literary studies. So as a group of scholars that span across the continent, we try and take seriously this question of how the popular emerges and why is it useful and impactful.
My interest in popular literature is mainly in romance fiction, and I came to popular literature through reading Mills and Bones and romance imprints such as Harlequin. And one of the questions that I try to answer, or I'm trying to explore, is why is romance fiction read widely? Why does it seem to be dismissed as escapist and frivolous? And why is it that women's fiction gets dismissed as such? Is it because it deals mainly with a female audience and female readers and female writers? Is it because, as critics claim, it does not deal with socio-economic problems? What is it? Is it because it's formulaic genre? But if we look at detective fiction and crime fiction, that is also formulaic. But why is it that romance fiction gets to be branded as this frivolous genre? And if you're looking at it from an African perspective, one of the things that Stephanie Newell argues is that women in Africa have taken the genre and they're appropriating the genre to challenge patriarchal structures and patriarchal convention. My interest is to look at how women are using it to challenge patriarchal conventions, but also how they're using it to challenge Western publishing houses that have seemed to always dominating the publishing industry in Africa.
My focus is on early 20th century newspapers and periodicals as part of a wider excavation of Black intellectual life in South Africa. I'm approaching the newspaper as a kind of archive, a kind of countercultural space, partly as an attempt to decenter the colonial library. I suppose there are a couple of strands in the research which I can highlight are interest in the newspaper as a space of political articulation, imagining, and debate. Also looking at the newspaper as a space of popular knowledge production. So I'm particularly interested in, for example, the women's page and how that becomes a space for women to write and articulate themselves. Also a kind of everyday philosophy which it facilitates. And then also just thinking about the newspaper as convening a kind of transnational, pan-African diasporic space. A space of connection, a space of exchange, a space of intersection. Another important aspect is the idea of the newspaper as a document of reading. So reading the newspaper in order to find out what people were reading, but also how they were reading, and the kinds of texts that they are quoting or citing in the newspaper, and the ways in which those texts are kind of recycled and reimagined in new contexts.
I suppose my point of entry as a researcher has always been experience, and so drawing from the everyday, I think, is something that we share in our practice as thinkers. What do people do, act, what informs the other ways that we relate to one another, the forms of language, the registers we use, inside jokes, for example. If you think about the things you share with your family on WhatsApp, that you can only this audience will understand. So just how do we think about the forms of language people use in their lives that aren't simply about understanding forms of expression outside of like a kind of monolingual sense of what language and interaction means, but that these are things that are politically alive, right? So there may be ways in contexts where one can't speak truth to power to the state, for instance, and yet we have all these other languages to to articulate a relationship to power, to the state, to family, to partners. So I think there's a rich way from thinking through experience, thinking through the language people use in the everyday, that we can also reconfigure a theory of power. And I think that's across the board in all the work we do.
My project on African science fiction and African speculative imaginaries intersects with this project in similar ways, as my colleagues have explained. Interested in ideas of the alleged universality of genre. And so consequently, what I find through my research is that African writers and practitioners of science fiction and speculative fiction, and also film as well to a large extent, use the popular arts as a way of questioning the alleged universality and then consequently cultural power of the West. And so through this process we find that they also invent new and interesting imaginaries that I think are quite important in our urban context, and allow us to imagine ourselves differently as Africans in a larger and also in the popular realm, which is quite significant and I think culturally and intellectually interesting. Primarily I'm invested in exploring points of contestation that exist between the local and the global, and to see how this intersection can be explored in ways that are maybe not as polarizing as we tend to deploy them. All of us as a team have been using this time here at STIAS to work on our individual projects, and then also to spend the time in this lovely environment to meet and to then further our points of intersection between these projects. And so as an Okapi team, we are really grateful for the 2 weeks that we've spent here. It's been way too short, but it's been a wonderful communal and intellectual experience for us all.